Hello everybody, and welcome in. Can't hardly believe it, but this is Ask the Stud 6. And wow, they just get bigger every one that we do, which is really great. Obviously, I think the fans out there are really enjoying these. And questions are just phenomenal again with this one, just like they have been with the other 5. Really, really great questions. So I got such knowledgeable fans, man. It's really amazing. And I really enjoy these, and gosh, it's a not just a pleasure, but it's an honor to be able to discuss the profession in a way that I don't think many people beyond myself and a few others could do. I mean, these questions come about all different aspects of the sports, not just the wrestling part of it, there's the promotion part of it, there's the historical part of it. Wow, the questions are just amazing to me. They cover everything, and and I guess I have just about as much experience as anybody in the history of the sport and every aspect of the business. And really looking forward to this one. And thank you very much for joining us. And we're gonna get it kicked off.
Our first question is from Masa Inoki, Osaka, Japan. I remember you wrestle in Japan. What is the most big highlight of wrestling career?
He's got that Japanese style of writing, I'll tell you that. He thinks pretty good job with the English language, though, Osaka. Wow, Osaka brings back a lot of memories to me. It was when I wrestled in Japan in 1983. It was the very first trip we took, and it was the very first night we wrestled in Japan. It was a tag team tournament. Barry Windham was my partner. And Barry was tremendous at this point in his career. Really, really a great worker. And we wrestled against Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen to open up the tour. And I had a lot of doubts right then about, wow, are we going to be able to make it through this tour? I'm glad we didn't have Bruiser and Stan Hansen every night. We got them 2 or 3 times during that tour, but there was and I noticed that this gentleman's from Osaka, Japan, and his last name is a wrestling name, Inoki. So I don't know if he's related to Inoki, but I wasn't wrestling for the Inoki company. I was wrestling for Baba's company, but there was 2 wrestling companies in Japan, and both of them were doing very well. And I think his question was about what was one of my greatest experiences, basically, in the sport, and that could be a whole lot of things. There, I got a whole lot of things that pop right into my head. But I think one of the things that I was probably most proud of was happened in 1985, and it was the very first night that we did the first continental television program from Birmingham, Alabama, back to 2 big trucks in next to the building. We had 5 cameras, we had the handhelds, we had 9,000 people in the building. It was totally sold out. We had Ric Flair wrestling Bob Armstrong in the main event, which they didn't see on the TV show, but they did see Ric Flair wrestle, on someone on the TV show. And it was just we had moved out of a small studio with 250 people, all you could pack into a little television studio, to 9,000 fans, and you could tell it. Wow, the noise and the sound, and it was magnificent. It had a little glitch in that first program that we did, the first TV, but overall it was just outstanding. It was really, really phenomenal. Gordon Soley was there. He was his first program, first time he had ever worked for my company. He was the man in television wrestling. He was doing the Georgia program. He was doing the Florida program. He was the best he was at the top of his game, just like a lot of the other of us were at the top of our game, 1985. And well, he just loved it too. After it was over, he just was like, Ron, my gosh, it's the greatest thing I've ever seen, you know. And it was totally different. No one else in the country in 1985 was doing this big building, big arena television show. So it was the first. It was a monumental event in wrestling. And it certainly was a monumental event for our company. We had done great. We had the war in Knoxville. After Knoxville, we all went back. Bob, Rob, Jimmy, all of us went down and worked in our Pensacola territory. We built that son of a gun to be huge. We bought Birmingham and we expanded to northern Alabama. And then 1985, one of the reasons that I wanted to build the Continental Company is because I wanted to go back to Knoxville and reach up into Kentucky again. So this was just the first step in doing that, Mr. Inoki. It really got us off and running. We went back not too long, I guess probably 3 months after we did that first program. We were back in Knoxville. We went in there and put our TV on there for about 3 months. We went back to Knoxville. There was a dead town, had been dead since 1979 when we left. And we went back in and sold out the Coliseum, very first show. And wow, we had such a television product. It was really an amazing product. And so was the company. We had some tremendous wrestlers. We had, guys that nobody had ever seen in Knoxville before, Adrian Street and Wendell Cooley and the Nightmares. It was a tremendous crew and a tremendous time. And I'd have to say that was one of the very biggest highlights of my wrestling career, was that night in Birmingham, Alabama, 9,000 people. For the very first night of Continental Championship Wrestling and the very first Continental Television Wrestling show.
Our next question is from Kim Ward, Dallas, Texas. Big fan of your brother Robert and Jimmy Golden, who feuded here with the Von Erich brothers. My question is, was there ever an angle you did that you regretted?
Well, what I'm thinking about that angle part of it, pretty quickly, I can get to that first part about my brother and Jimmy wrestling the Von Erichs. Wow, and I would have really loved to have the opportunity. I wish I had stayed in wrestling longer to be able to get that opportunity to work with that family. I became friends with David Von Erich basically in one weekend. We spent a weekend in Las Vegas and an NWA convention. David was there, Fritz was there with David. And my dad and I were there. I had my own territory. I was a member of the NWA at that point. Dad had him and Eddie Graham were out of Florida, had their membership. And it was a great experience. David was a tremendous guy. Really had a good time with him, and I could see that he was probably a great talent, although I never got to see him actually wrestle, especially at that time. Later on, I've seen matches. But we had a great time, and he and I. And so, it was a, but let's go back to, I think you're probably talking about a time frame around somewhere, probably around 1989, maybe 90. They were wrestling Rob and Jimmy out of Jerry Jarrett's territory, Memphis. And Jerry ran Memphis on years after most promotions were all done and quit running. And Rob and Jimmy were great heels for him. And wow, Rob and Jimmy wrestled maybe 2,000 matches as a team. Those guys were just tremendous as a team, and they were also good on the mic, and they wrestled against some great wrestlers. Those Von Erich boys were just fantastic. And there's a family, man, that since Kim, I think your name was Kim, that brought this up. There's a family there that it's one of the saddest stories in the history of wrestling, that family. It's just, it's shocking. It's a shocking, that whole scenario is a shocking thing. And Rob and Jimmy, when we talked about these matches they were having, they were like, Ron, these guys are just, they're pounding us, they're killing us. I mean, you know, and one of those guys, I don't know if anybody ever knew it, and you know, it might not have been commonly known in wrestling, but one of those boys had lost his foot in a motorcycle accident and was wrestling with boot on that didn't have a foot in it. Crazy story. And a couple of them committed suicide. Terrible thing for the Texas fans. And I saw how tremendous they were doing. The business they were doing was absolutely phenomenal back in those days. Vince had pretty much shut everything else down. But I saw him run the Texas show in the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, the one that had the hole in the roof. And big card, big crowd. Gosh, don't know, 20,000, 30,000. I don't know the exact figure, but that territory was really on fire. That family was over there. I mean, they said, wow, they were tremendously over. And they all had talent, and they all looked good. They all had great bodies. It was wrestling's. It was the old school's wrestling's final chapter, basically. And wow, it was a great one. And I'm glad my brother and Jimmy had the opportunity to work with those guys and to make that chapter memorable. And I don't think fans probably will ever see better matches than that. I mean, I know that those boys worked with the Freebirds for years, and that was a great combination for them. They had 3 or 4 boys in the family. They had 3 Freebirds. It was a great one too. And so, you know, but Rob and Jimmy, I think, went in there and did just as good a business and made themselves big names in Texas. Rob still has a lot of fans out in Texas, and so does Jimmy as well. And I want to thank you for that question. That's a very good question, and Kim, and we appreciate hearing from ladies, and like to have more of them. You know, and every time I get a question from a lady, it's a really good one, and this was a really great one. Thank you very much, Kim. I appreciate you contacting us.
Our next question comes from Bob Williams from Ohio. Why did Lance Russell do the Dayton TV show that you wrestled on, taped at the arena with Austin Idol, Randy Rose, and Wayne Ferris? It was in June of 1982.
Yeah, I can remember working in Dayton. My history with this Ohio wrestling is it's pretty pitiful, you know, in a way. My father and I, in 1976 and 1977, when Southeastern took off, it started really drawing big money. I got to hankering to have another territory, and so did my dad. My dad still wanted to be in wrestling. He was training some guys to wrestle, and we both took a look at Ohio. Wrestling in Ohio. Actually, we were dealing with a couple of television stations, one in Cincinnati and one in Dayton, trying to get on and seeing if we could get on TV, that we were going to buy the territory from the Sheik. Wrestling was dead there. Sheik had killed it, and you know, and his matches were all blood and no content, no wrestling. Really a bad product. So by 1982, and I think you're right about this, the gentleman that asked this question, I think you're right about that. I believe it's Bob. Bob, I believe you're right about it being 1982. But I do remember wrestling Austin Idol on the TV show. And by this point, my dad was highly involved with Jerry Jarrett out of the Memphis territory. And my dad really wanted to go into Ohio. And me, when I went up there and we couldn't get on TV, I decided to buy the Gulf Coast territory and go down and buy it from the Fields brothers, who was related to the Welch family, and buy that territory and start my own business down there. And in 1979, we talk about in present day Studcast, we had the Knoxville territory and we had a southeastern Gulf Coast territory. Both of them were doing good early part of 1979, and it turned out to be a good deal for me. Anyway, I think what happened there, Bob, and I believe your question was something about, kind of why was Lance Russell there? Well, the main reason Lance Russell was there is because Lance Russell was the head commentator for the Memphis television show. And if they're going to try to get on the air in Ohio, Lance Russell was a great television commentator. He was one of the very, very best. So obviously they'd want to have Lance come up there and do that TV show because he could do as good a job with it as anybody else. So that's why Lance was there, because all the wrestlers and all the promoters, and the promoters, which was Jerry Jarrett and my father, they were all out of Memphis, Tennessee. So, they took their crew up there. Austin Idol was working for them at that point. So was, I think you mentioned Wayne Ferris, Randy Rose. We got 2 or 3 guys there, real key players, 3 great wrestlers. And so I remember the conversation that my dad and I had, though, which was, it was really kind of contentious in a way, because I went up there, didn't know who I was going to wrestle. I did a favor for him. He said, will you come up and wrestle on the show? We need somebody that can do some wrestling. So I said, sure, I'm glad to come up there and help you guys get off, do a good start. And so then he put me in the ring with, when we got there and he set me down, he said, I want you to have a great wrestling match with Austin Idol. And I was like, gosh, Dad, Austin Idol was a great star. Austin Idol, I'm not belittling Austin Idol, but he was not a great wrestler. He didn't have a lot of wrestling skills. And Dad says, I want you to do at least 20 minutes and all wrestling, no punches, no nothing, for 20 minutes. And I was like, geez, Dad, this is your first TV. You got to have some kind of excitement on it. You need to grasp these people. They're not going to watch your show if you don't give them something good, And I said, give me so-and-so and so-and-so. I think, I said Randy Rose, Wayne Ferris. Wayne Ferris was trained by Herb Welch, who was a part of our family, could wrestle some. I said, give me those 2 guys, somebody that I can do what you want to do. No, I want you to do it with Austin Idol. And so I remember the match, and I don't know, Bob, if maybe you remember it too. I didn't think it was one of the best matches I'd ever had by far. That's a good way of putting it, I guess. And it was really difficult to wrestle for fans that were accustomed to seeing brawls and blood. And, it was difficult. It was a difficult situation for me. I told Dad when I finished wrestling that night that, I was really busy. And I was. We had a tremendous territory in 1982. It was just about the same time of year that Bob Armstrong was going to turn heel on me with a Ric Flair World Championship match in Mobile, Alabama. And I said, Dad, I won't be able to come back and help you with this. I said, we've got a lot going on down there. And we did. We were one of the hottest territories in the world at that point. And it turned out that I think that little operation up there in Ohio lasted maybe a month, 6 weeks at the most. They went up and did 2 or 3 TVs. That TV that I was there, they did 2 or 3 TVs. And I think it maybe went back one more time. And they they left Ohio for good. Never had anybody from the South, I don't believe, ever go and try to make Ohio again. But I will say this, Bob, if it had been done properly, that would have been the best wrestling state in the world. I mean, gosh, it had all those monster cities, Cleveland and Cincinnati and Columbus and Toledo, and it just went on and on and on. Monster cities. Would have been a fantastic territory. But I was down south, I was on the Gulf Coast, I lived on the beach, and wow, I couldn't see Ohio, too cold in the winter.
Our next question comes from Michael Calloway. Tell us about your experience wrestling on the Star Wars 2 card at the Cow Palace in San Francisco in 1985.
Well, Michael, that was an experience. I guess I start with it like that. I got to put it that way. That was a real experience that night. I had a thing that I always wanted to wrestle in these big arenas, famous arenas, and I had that opportunity quite a bit, if I called the promoter and said, I'd like to work on one of your shows, they would normally do that just about everywhere. In the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. I mean, I worked in so many big name arenas. And I remember in 1985 having some time, and territory was just doing great. Continental had just got started, and we were just going great, gangbusters, and I wanted to take a little vacation, and so I got in touch with Vern Gagne, who was, his operation was AWA, American Wrestling Alliance, and they ran out of Minnesota, and they were running all the way to the West Coast. He had expanded his operation. He was running in Denver, and then he got out there into San Francisco, running in the Cow Palace. So I called him up and said, Vern, would you put me on your Cow Palace show? He said, yeah, I got this big event, man, Star Wars 2. He goes, yeah, and he said, do you want me to book you as you? And I said, no, because, I don't mind going out there, and if you got somebody that needs a good win, I'll do the deal for him, but I want to wear a mask. And he said, that'll be fine. So, and Michael, I don't really know how you know that it was me under that mask, except for I got a fairly unique body, I guess. You'd have to go, well, wait a minute, man. He looks very familiar in a way. So, but anyway, so I go out there at that match, and I work with one of the Nasty Boys as a partner, and he's wearing a mask too, Knobs. I work with Knobs, the Nasty Boys, and we work against Russ Francis, which there's a story there, goes all the way back to Hawaii, the Francis family, big name. Russ was a professional football player, became a wrestler after he was a football player, and Russ Francis and Superfly Snuka. Wow, I mean, we tore the house down. It was an absolutely unbelievable match. I mean, both of those guys were great. And, and on the end of the deal with Superfly, man, he flew into the rafters, man, and he squashed me. And, we had just a tremendous match. And it was a great experience. When I went out there, I wasn't expecting to work with Superfly and Russ Francis. And I certainly wasn't expecting to have Knobs as a partner, because, those people that know the Nasty Boys, I mean, Knobs and him and his partner, they were out there, man, big time out there. And but that helped. I just got with it. And, me and Knobs made a great partners. We both did crazy things, and they loved it out there. And what a great experience it was for me. Took my wife, and we stayed out there a whole week. We saw Pebble Beach. We went to all the wine country, it was a tremendous, tremendous vacation. And then the highlight was to work in the Cow Palace. It wasn't sold out, but they had a pretty big crowd. It was a pretty big crowd. And, great, great experience. It's one of those things you never forget. And one of those little bit of a highlight in your life, man, when you work at the Madison Square Gardens and, the big buildings all around the country, the Omnis in Atlanta, and it's like a feather in your hat for one thing, but the experience of it was hard to describe. And I had my brother and my cousin were always very strange about these deals. They would go, Ron, I hear you going out to San Francisco. And I go, yeah, I'm gonna work the Cow Palace. And they go, why? I was like, what do you mean, why? I said, wow, have you ever worked the Cow Palace? Well, no. You know about it, right? Oh, yeah, we know. We're having the big building, man, famous building, Hey, who you gonna work with? I said, I don't know. It don't make any difference, really, does it? I want to work in the Cow Palace. And when my career is over, I'll be able to look back and go, yeah, I worked in the Cow Palace too. So, it's strange, man, my relationship with Rob and Jimmy. And it's kind of odd. We're talking about Rob and Jimmy, and we just answered a question about Rob and Jimmy, And speaking of that Texas Stadium and the Rob and Jimmy story that I just told in the last one, that didn't have the roof in the building. When I got to be in the ADT business in Tampa, Florida, I was the biggest person. I spent more money on Yellow Pages than anybody in the history of ADT. And they called me up one day. It was the last game they ever played in Texas Stadium, and the ADT people called me up and they said, Ron, we want to take you on a trip. And I said, what are you talking about, guys? And they go, we're going to take you to the Dallas Cowboys' last home game in their stadium, and you're going to sit in the box seat with, I can't remember, it was two of the great stars of the Dallas Cowboys sitting in the box with me. It was unbelievable. What an event. So I got to do it all, man. And I guess I should have talked to Rob and them. I don't know if we discussed that with Rob and Jimmy. I'd like to see what they'd say about that one. But thanks for your question. It's a great one, and I appreciate it.
Our next question is from Jeff Shelton, Newport, Tennessee. My cousin, my brother, and I saw Southeastern wrestling in Newport when I was young. We sat in the balcony. My cousin took off his boot and threw it from the balcony into the ring where Ronnie Garvin was wrestling the Mongolian Stomper to help Garvin. Stomper got it instead and beat the hell out of Garvin with it. Did that type of thing happen often?
Oh, that's a good story, man. I like your story here, son. This is a good one. Well, it was not a good idea to throw stuff into the ring, especially it was better to place it in the hands of the guy you wanted to have it rather than to do that type of thing. In Newport, Tennessee, I remember Newport, Tennessee's building, and it was a giant VFW. It was the biggest VFW building I ever saw, and it had a balcony upstairs, and it probably held 3,000 people. It might have held 3,000 people, and every time I ever wrestled in it, it had 4,000 in it. I mean, it was always packed. We were so hot. Southeastern was so hot back in the 70s that. And that's the time period you got Ronnie Garvin here and you got Mongolian Stomper wrestling each other. That building would, I can just see the picture. I can picture it, Stomper beating the heck out of Garvin and somebody up in the balcony throwing a boot down in the ring. And obviously, the wrong guy got the boot. I mean, it sounds like, man, your cousin should have waited till Ronnie was kicking butt before he threw the boot into the ring, and then Ronnie got the boot. But, Stomper's kicking butt, and the boot lands there beside him, I'm sure. And he just picks it up and says, well, this is making my night easy, And he went to work, obviously. Like you said, he beat the heck out of Ronnie. I'm sure he did. Well, another aspect of this is, back in those days, you had to be extremely careful in that part of the country about riots. I mean, people would just go crazy. They would come into the ring. The ring would be full of fans sometimes. There'd be 15 fans in the ring trying to fight the wrestlers. It was just, police would arrest a lot of people. They would arrest a lot of wrestlers. It was that, and there was a dangerous situation there. Stomper beating the heck out of Ronnie Garvin with a boot that got thrown out of the balcony. I can see that being a very difficult and very dangerous deal. And then I got a little question for you, you got your cousin, when he's got to go home, he's got no boot on his foot, I'm sure that whoever, your mom, your dad, his dad, when you got home and they started asking him, what happened to your boot? Then he's got to tell a story, right? And I'm sure he probably told the honest truth. He said, I saw it happening and I wanted to help him, and I took my boot off and I threw it down there in the ring, and I got a feeling, that boy might have got his rear end beat just about like Ronnie Garvin did for tossing his boot down there. In that part of the country, fans were, they didn't mind kicking a little butt themselves when they needed to, and it sounds like that boy needed to have his butt kicked a little bit.
Our next question is from Joe Payne. Who has made the greatest impact on your career as a pro wrestler? And if you could change one event in your career, what would that be and why?
Oh, that's a great question. Two questions. You're doubling up on me here, Joe. Who had the most influence on me in my career? And I don't know if people would expect this answer, but this is the honest answer, because this guy took me under his wing when I first came into the territory where he was. He was a huge star. He was not only that, he was one of the greatest amateur wrestlers of all time. And won national championships. I think he won 2 of them, might even won 3 of them, I don't know. And he was on fire in the Florida territory. And that was Jack Briscoe. And Jack just took me under his wing, and wow, watched my matches and came back and critiqued them for me and told me you should have done this, you should have done that. I watched him wrestle. Wow. And he was just so phenomenal. He was, and gosh, he was in a great time frame, man. Dory Funk Jr. was the champion, the world champion. I had the opportunity to watch him and Jack Briscoe wrestled, I'd say at least 10 times to 1-hour draws. Some of the greatest wrestling matches I ever saw. And, Jack doing what he did for me. And then, as my career got a little further along, this was 1970, I'd only been wrestling 6 months. 2 years later, they were sending me to St. Louis, and Jack came to me, and Jack had the treatment. They had done that with him before he became Florida champion, and this was before he'd ever become world champion as well. And he said, "Ron, you're going to St. Louis?" I said, "Yeah, man. They booked me in St. Louis." And he goes, "How many shows you got to have there, you think?" I said, "I don't know, maybe just one, Anyway, he kept up with it. Every time he saw me, he said, "Geez, how many times you been now? Well, I've been 10 in a row. And he goes, wow, man, Ron, that's unreal. I mean, they're thinking, they're looking at you, man. They're looking at you. You know, and I'm like, what do you mean they're looking at me? You know, I mean, what does that mean exactly, Jack? And he goes, you know, they may be thinking about the big belt, man. You know, and I was like, oh, come on, Jack. You gotta be kidding, you know, I don't know about that. And it's about that time that they put the big belt on Jack, you know. So, but Jack Briscoe to me was just a phenomenal wrestler and wow, just a tutor. And he really did some great things with me, and he really took care of me. He treated me like I was Jerry, like his brother. You know, he just really he endeared himself to me, I guess is a good way of putting it. And I remember one night in Tallahassee, Florida, and me and Jack are working on the same card, and I'm working about the match before him, maybe 2 matches before his. He's in the main event every night, just about. And I did a little move where I shot a guy in the ropes, and when he came, I had the guy shot me in the ropes. I was crisscrossing, and the guy stepped behind me when I ran past him. He hooked me, and he ran me into the ropes, and he started to O'Connor roll me. And before we got to the ropes, I reached back inside his thigh, and I just swung around right behind him, and I kept running, and I rolled him. And I remember coming to the dressing room. I had never done that move before, but I had been practicing it. And I wanted to make sure I could do it before I ever tried it in the ring. And I came to the dressing room, and Jack was jumping up to the ceiling. He was like, Ron, what is that move? Did you reverse that O'Connor roll? I said, yeah. What do you think of that, Jack? And he goes, I think I'm stealing it, Ron. He goes, I'm doing that move. I might do it after you now. I said, don't do it tonight, Jack. He goes, I don't do it tonight, but hey, I'm going to do that move, Ron. He goes, I'm telling you up front, you know, I'm going to steal that one from you. But wow, he was a great guy. And then you talked about the event. What was the event that was most horrible? You know, and that's the event, something that was really, that sticks with me, and that's really simple for me, man. That don't take much thought from me at all. There's nothing ever happened to me in wrestling that ever had the effect on me that the Knoxville War had. And that happens to be another subject that's in our recent studcast here, what we're doing every week now about the wrestling war. There was nothing that affected me ever in my life like that did. And wow, it was a horrible experience for me. Having been, blown off by 5 guys that you had taken care of and tried to make money for them and tried to treat them right, and it took me a long time to ever get over that. And in some respects, I've never gotten over it, and probably never will. But that would be the event, I would say, that really affected me more than anything that ever happened to me in wrestling.
Our next question is from Steve Hodges. The thing that bothers me most about the Knoxville War and attempt to take over your company was Ron Wright being a part of it. The other stooges I couldn't care less about. Why do you think Ron took part in that?
That's a great question. Well, you ain't the only one, man, that loves Ron Wright. You know, that's for sure. And they hated him. They loved him or they loved to hate him. Either way, they loved him, whether he was a baby face or a heel. And I felt the same way when I came to Knoxville in 1974, and I bought the territory, and I sat my first night and watched the card. that I hadn't booked. It was my first night there, and obviously I bought it from John Kazana, and he had booked the card. And I watched the card, and I really thought to myself, because I had come from Florida, that was a tremendous territory, had great talent. Having come from all that, we just talked about Jack Briscoe and guys like that. I watched the card and I said to myself, going home, I said, there's only one guy on that whole card that I would really use, and that was Ron Wright. And I went to Ron Wright probably the second week that I was there, and I got him off to the side and I said, Ron, I'm going to be a heel here. And I said, I've never healed before in my life, and I've watched you, and I've heard about you. Actually, he had been to Florida and he brought his chisel, and we'd been through all that. I had seen the chisel and I knew the whole story about Ron Wright. And I said, Ron, I'm going to be a heel, and I've got only one person here I see that I'd like to work with, that I think we can draw money with, and that's you. And he was like, oh, well, yeah, Ron, yeah, that's good. Yeah, well, that's a good thing. But you a heel and I'm a heel. And I said, no, you ain't a heel no more, Ron. He goes, you want to turn me baby face? And I said, yeah. I said, I think you're going to make a great baby face. If I can get some heat, you're the guy that's going to get the deal done. And so he was like shaking his head, I knew he couldn't picture it, he couldn't see it, but then once we were 3 months in, and we didn't wrestle against each other, and I just spent 3 months as a heel, calling him the #1 hillbilly. He's an ignorant hillbilly, man, and avoiding having matches with him, and then finally came down to a situation to where it had to happen. And first time we ever wrestled together, we sold out the building. It was the little Chilhowie Park indoor building, the Jacobs building. But later on, man, we sold out the big outside park, and we sold out the Coliseum, with Ron Wright as a babyface and me as a heel. So I had great feelings for Ron Wright, kind of like I think you do, the gentleman that wrote this, that asked the question. And I had great feelings toward Ron Wright, and I was most disappointed of the 5 guys, of the Ronnie Garvin and the Bob Orton Jr. and the Bob Roop and the great Malenko, and then it was Ron Wright. Of all 5 of them, he was the one I really hated to have it happen. I was disappointed in Ron, and I think it's from the way you write your question. I think you were disappointed in Ron too, and and then as time goes by, I'm telling you, I've learned a lesson in life, and I learned it early. And one of the reasons that I learned to forgive was the Knoxville War. And so Ron Wright wrestled with that group of guys, All-Star Wrestling, the next night after we wrestled, all the rest of the summer of 1979 until I sold the business, and then I left, and he stayed with those guys. But I think he was one of the first guys to leave the group of 5. He wasn't happy with the way things had gone down. They didn't have any success. And so, I didn't see Ron. I was down there in the Gulf Coast and working the territory that was on fire. Wow! And then we had come and extended it and bought Birmingham and Huntsville and northern Alabama and all the way to Tennessee again. And so when it came back 6 years later, this is 1979, I never saw Ron Wright or spoke to him from 1979 to 1985, which is 6 years. And the first night we ran Continental and came back in the Coliseum in Knoxville, guess who showed up in the dressing room? It was Ron Wright. He and I, he tried to, he never came to me, but I could see him, wanting to. He wanted to come and apologize. And finally, toward the end of the evening, he got, "Can you come here, Ron?" And he took me in another room, and he apologized. He said, "What a mistake I made in my life, and you were so good to me, and all this, and I forgave Ron right then. And I said, Ron, you want a spot? You want to work in the crew?" Because he had such phenomenal talent. And he lit up like a Christmas tree. He goes, "You serious, Ron? You take me back?" And I go, "Heck yeah, I'll take you back." I said, "I'll take you back. I'll get you a guy to manage you." And before we finished the conversation, I had him hooked up with one of my heels, and I learned so much from that little conversation with Ron about forgiving, and it felt good, and I know he felt good about it, and so and we made a lot of money together. He came in, he managed a group of guys. In 1988, I started USA Wrestling in Knoxville, and he was my head manager. He was the show. It was Ron Wright, and he had the Stomper, he had the Moondog, he had all the heels, the major stars. It was Ron Wright's group. He had an army of his own. Well, I guess it's a good story about forgiveness. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I understood how you felt. And I just wonder how you felt when you saw him back again with Continental and back again with USA.
Our next question is from Michael West. Knowing what you know now, what could you have done in 1982 to 83 to prevent McMahon from taking over the TBS TV wrestling show and gaining inroads into the South? How could the Crockett's, Watts, and you and other promoters have officially worked together to stop it? If that had happened, how could the TBS TV show have been used to benefit the entire NWA and not just a few promoters?
That's a good question, Michael. I'm gonna jump past the first part of it. There's a lot of ifs in there, and so obviously McMahon had the money to buy into Atlanta and TBS and get on that satellite station. But let's talk about if we had have been able to combine me, the Crockett's, Bill Watts, maybe Jerry Jarrett, maybe Vern Gagne, a group of us go in there and had have got our hands on that television rather than Vince McMahon, I think wrestling would still be just as hot as it was back in the 70s and the 80s. I think it would have changed everything. I think Vince Jr. had a bad concept of what wrestling was all about. He didn't respect actual wrestling. He didn't respect shooters. He just didn't. He took it in the wrong direction, in the totally wrong direction. But you mentioned getting together with these guys, these other promoters. I don't know if everybody realizes it, but we, as a wrestling promoter, there was a National Wrestling Alliance, but every one of those guys, 30 of them, were all individuals. The sport had been split up around the country and around the globe to a bunch of different owners. It had been since the late 40s, early 50s, since anybody had owned pretty much all the country. Jim Barnett, and he he had a lot of control over major cities in the country. But after the NWA got started, you had all these professors that came in and sat down at these meetings, and they wanted to cooperate with everybody, but they didn't want to own, everybody's. They wanted to do their own thing. They were so independent, the promoters in the country, that the last thing they ever thought about was having to combine with somebody else to compete. And so when all this started to go down, and McMahon got that TBS television, and he had his others, by that point he had the NBC show, he had 2 national television programs, and nobody's going to be able to compete with that unless they had a national television program. And it was not a feeling among the promoters in the NWA that we need to get together and we need to do that in order to compete. I don't think that all of them figured out that this is going to be the end of wrestling. I don't. And if we had all of the pictured that being the way it turned out, then we might have gotten together. And then I think if someone did, this is maybe the last if of your question here, is if we did get together, how could we have put together a show on TBS that would have helped everybody? And I got an answer to that one for darn sure. I think if you had a television show that was seen nationwide, that what you do is you sit down with all the promoters and you make sure every territory's big star gets to work on that TV. And not just once every 6 months. Try to get every major star with every one of those territories a win on that big TBS world satellite. You were seen everywhere. I was on that TV before McMahon got his hands on it, and I was a star in the Cayman Islands. I went to visit the Cayman Islands, and everybody there knew me when I got off the plane. So it was a big, big deal at TBS television, and I think we could have built a bigger, better business than McMahon ever dreamed of, and I think we could have made it still legitimate to fans out there, and old school would still be here. I think if it had been, if something like that had happened, I really believe that we'd still be watching old school wrestling.
Our next question is from Edward B. Robinson, Evergreen, Alabama. In terms of pure wrestling styles, how do Ron Fuller, Robert Fuller, and Jimmy Golden compare and contrast?
Wow. Mr. Robinson, I'm very familiar with this gentleman. Wow. Great guy. Evergreen, Alabama. I don't know if that's down there close to, where Forrest Gump came from or not, but it's got to be. I kind of picture that area being kind of similar, man. Beautiful part of the country down there. I love that, Alabama. Great question. It's hard to compare and contrast your styles with your brother and your cousin in a way. Obviously my brother and I grew up kind of wrestling against each other, and it wasn't always a fun little experience wrestling with Rob, and usually ended up more than just a wrestling match. And same thing with Jimmy later on, because Jimmy ended up being the heel sometimes, and we had the experience of, we all changed so much, Edward, there were times when I was a baby face and the two of them was a heel, and there was times when they were baby faces and I was the heel. I worked with Jimmy probably 100 times. And wow, to contrast our styles, they both were they hammered me all the time about, Ron, you're stiff. You gotta loosen up, man. Especially when I worked with them. When I worked with them, I really heard it. But most of the time, even when I didn't, they would go, Ron, geez, why didn't have to hit him like that? And I'm like, well, guys, come on. Sometimes, you don't always, it don't come out like you want it to sometimes, right? And the three of us had a great relationship, Edward. And I'm sure you kind of could see it like everybody else. I remember working a match with Jimmy in Mobile, Alabama one night in which he honestly got so mad that he wanted to shoot, and he was starting to throw these punches that were, we were going to bust each other up, and I had to take him down and hold him down, till I could cool him off, before I let him go again. We had some very convincing matches sometimes because they were half shoots on occasions, and my brother and I, luckily, we didn't end up wrestling against each other except one time, I think it was, and we never actually locked up in the match that we were supposed to be against each other. So, but Jimmy and I, like I said, we had a whole lot of matches with me and Jimmy. I don't know anything better, Edward, that I can say to contrast the styles. And, I was a little stiffer than those boys were. They were a phenomenal tag team. Gosh almighty, I loved to watch them, and so did everybody else. They were good, whether they were heels or baby faces. It didn't make any difference. And, and we were all similar. And in certain ways, I could see some Jimmy in me, and he could see some of me in him, and same thing with Rob. And what a great question. You could almost get us into a little Tennessee stud war here, Edward. If I had Rob sitting here and Jimmy over there egging him on, we might have a little bit who's the real Tennessee stud going on. Wow. Thanks, everybody. And my first inclination, man, when I get to the end of these is to thank everybody for listening and to thank all those people that asked these great questions, man. And they just keep getting better. It's pretty amazing. Got some really, really great, knowledgeable fans out there, and thank you so much for these shows are just amazing. Every one I do gets bigger, and it gets bigger faster. Wow. So I hope everybody enjoyed this one. And I think we're near probably around 10 questions again. I think every show is about 10 questions or something like that. I wish we could do more, but since we're going to keep doing these, I don't see any need in trying to do them all in one show, basically. I'm going to keep doing it because I like it. I really, really enjoy it. And I hope that every fan out there that watches them kind of enjoys it too. And so let's talk a little bit about the next one. We're going to be coming back for you again. It's going to be obviously in July this next time. There's 5 Saturdays in July. So if you could mark on your calendar, like I used to say in the first interview I ever did in Southeastern Wrestling down there, in Mobile and in that territory. Terry Funk, I remember, did it one time in an interview that he sent into my territory. He said to take your finger, especially old coal miners. He said, you coal miners in Tennessee, take your finger and rub it on that dirty wall and take it and circle July 15th. And that's going to be the next one. It's the 3rd Saturday in the month of July. And please get together and join us again. Send me the questions. This time, got the questions really fast. And I'd like to do that again. I'd like to make sure that we're going to have the proper number of questions. And thank y'all all so much for joining us again. And we'll see you on Ask the Stud number 7.